What even is literacy? How do you know what literacy is? Who gets to decide who is or isn't literate? Hi, everyone. I'm Professor Henry, and in a couple of short, but maybe not so short videos, I'd like to take some time to talk generally about some of these big questions, while specifically introducing the concept of academic literacy. This is the first of 3 videos, so you can take each one a chunk at a time and process and reflect in between. So come on and take a deep breath with me. And let's get started. Literacy is a pretty big topic, and I teach several versions of college courses that are centered around academic literacy. Starting the journey toward academic literacy in higher education is at least a semester-long course. And that's only the foundation. So just know that I'm limiting this conversation to big picture ideas. I should also say that I have 2 audiences in mind here. On the one hand, these videos are supplements to textbook material for my students. And on the other hand, I'm speaking to a broader audience who might generally be interested in how or why academic thinking, reading, writing, and communicating are different than non-academic thinking, writing, and so on. If at any point I offer anything of value to you, I'd sure appreciate you letting me know by giving me a thumbs up with a like and sharing this video with anyone else whom you think might be interested. With that, let's get started. We'll begin by thinking about each word by itself. By the way, breaking a larger thing into its component parts and then figuring out how those parts interact and fit together is one way to engage in something called analysis. So what we're doing here is analyzing the phrase academic literacy. So, academic. What are some things that come to mind when you hear the term academic? You might think back to primary or secondary school and recall all of those required academic subjects that may have gotten in the way of some of the more fun things like band or choir or drama or sports and so on. Granted, we can look at and work with each of those activities from an academic point of view. I'll bet that when you hear the word academic, you think about things like reading, writing, math, science, history, social studies, and so on. All of those kinds of things that you do in a traditional classroom setting are, yes, academic, along with the institution that facilitates the study of these things. Traditionally, these are referred to as the academy. In fact, people who invest their mental and physical energy in and around the academy professionally are often called academics. For example, I am an academic. So the academic part of academic literacy is pretty broad. It refers to the various academic subjects, or in higher education, we often use the phrase academic disciplines to group similar subjects together, like the discipline of the humanities groups together subjects like literature, art, music, philosophy, and linguistics. It also refers to the institutions that facilitate the study of those disciplines. And it refers to the people who are professional academics. Okay, now what about the literacy part? I'll pose the same question that I posed earlier. When it comes to literacy, what comes to your mind when you hear that word, literacy? Like, what might it mean to be literate? A lot of folks think about literacy in terms of a basic skill set in reading and writing. Like, to be literate means that you can read and write. Conversely, one might be called illiterate if they cannot read or write. Or, and I get pretty angry when I experience this, someone is called illiterate if the perception is that they cannot read or write well. Bear with me on this brief tangent, but I need to touch on this briefly. That derogatory comment does no good for anyone, and it forces us into black and white thinking. That is, it forces us into this space where either we're literate experts or we're illiterate non-experts with no in-between. That's just not helpful whatsoever. Because we need expertise to help navigate our way through complex problems and to drive innovation. Yet non-experts shouldn't themselves feel illiterate or be made to feel illiterate by others in a derogatory sense. Shame, insecurity, and defensiveness are sure to accompany that. And then we just end up running into a brick wall. Families rift and relationships end through this kind of stuff. Instead, I invite us to think about literacy as a process, a journey. I've been teaching college courses since 2012, yet every day I acquire new literacy in my primary discipline, which, yes, is reading and writing. But I work toward gaining literacy in other areas every day too. For example, during the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, I worked toward acquiring literacy in video editing and audio mixing and engineering, so that I could help some of the communities that I care about stay together in at least some way. My work toward becoming literate in these areas has enabled me to make videos like this one for all of you. I wouldn't consider myself literate in multimedia production, or even in reading and writing studies, because literate to me implies a finality, like, yes, I've arrived, I'm literate. Instead, I like to think of myself as having greater or lesser degrees of literacy in stuff. I have a great deal of literacy in reading and writing studies. I have a fair amount of literacy in music. I have some literacy in multimedia production, but I have very little literacy in, say, automotive mechanics. In that field, I know so little that I don't even know what I don't know. And I don't feel any shame when I have to seek an automotive expert for help. They have skills, training. They have literacy in that area that I do not. Likewise, I hope none of you feel any shame for seeking out expertise in reading, writing, and critical thinking when you want to increase your literacy in those areas. Just like automotive mechanics, reading and writing are skills. And with practice and dedication and patience, you can get better at them. In fact, that's part of what academic literacy is all about, figuring out how the academy works, practicing the skills of academics, and applying those skills to do well at the academy. Okay, so I've talked for quite a while now, but I think that sheds some light on the phrase academic literacy. In the next video, I'm going to spend some time talking about the first of two big picture things when it comes to academic literacy in terms of reading and writing. Academics treat reading and writing as a conversation. So that's something to think about for now. What might that mean? Reading and writing as a conversation. I follow that video up with another that explores the second big picture. Communication in and outside of the academy is heavily genre-based. So spend some time thinking about that as well. What comes to mind when you think of reading and writing in terms of genres? Okay, thanks for sticking with me through all of this, and we'll see you next time.